There endeth Chapter 2. So now we begin Chapter 3, and Dido is keeping her word about chastising Miss Florence for wheeling Roger's buttocks ever so cruelly. And this chapter is called A Mistress Disciplined. I lie not. Here it is. That night I lay restless, naked in bed and stiff of cock, my mind swirling with joyful thoughts of my bare body, the prey of stern ladies. The sounds of the crickets were much louder and angrier than before. Unable to sleep, I decided to make a foray and see these strange creatures for myself. You're not gonna find what you think you're gonna find, Roger. I dressed and crept barefoot into the garden, where the rhythmic slapping noise was quite loud and seemed nearby. I delved into the bushes and proceeded towards the corner of the house, but the noise seemed now to recede, as though the bushes muffled rather than revealed its source. I stepped out of the shrubbery, and there, on the corner, was Miss Florence's room, the light on, but the linen blind closed. Inside I saw two silhouetted female figures. I knew that was the source of the sound, and that it was no cricket. See that at the end of Chapter 1, when she told Roger, "You're fucking idiot. There are no crickets here. Because we're just beating the shit out of people." One of the figures was standing, holding an implement of some kind. The other was visible only in posterior, and seemed to be bending over to present her fesses to the first. The outline of clothing was visible on both figures, but the submissive one presented the smooth outline of thighs and bottom that must be bare. One portion of clothing was ruched up on her back, and the other lowered to her knees. The standing figure presented herself briefly in profile, and I recognized Dido's dainty chin and pert breasts. She lifted her implement, a rod of some kind, and brought it down swiftly a dozen or more times on the outstretched fesses of her companion, making that thin slapping crack, which in the distance I had imagined to be a cricket's chirp. The humiliant female made a tight groaning sound, as though her lips were restrained by a gag. "Shh!" hissed Dido. Moaned the victim. I could not stay my recognition that the voice was Miss Florence's. There was a pause, and another dozen strokes were delivered to Miss Florence's bared buttocks, which, even at a distance, I could observe twitching in her discomfort. She moaned again, and Dido urged her to silence. "You know you want it, bitch," she hissed. Harsh, rude. Sisterhood, come on. Another set of the rod followed, then a pause, and by now Miss Florence's moans had faded to a low, anguished sobbing, but the whooping continued unabated, with Dido the picture of calm. I peered more closely. The implement of chastisement seemed none other than a bamboo pole, like the one Miss Florence had first proposed for my own chastisement. I thought, ungraciously, that my mistress was getting away quite lightly. I could not imagine what drove my proud mistress to, quote, want it, as I, a humiliant male, wanted it. Yet the thought and the vision of her naked buttocks bare for a whipping made my cock stiffen and my balls tingle. At length, Dido lowered the pole out of sight, and her arm began to thrust vigorously, at which Miss Florence's moans grew to yelps. The spectacle ended for me when Dido sank to the floor, her head at Miss Florence's belly and crotch. After a few moments, during which my mistress sobbed loud and her buttocks quivered like jellies, Dido's arms rose and her fingers fastened on the nipples, then drew the sobbing Miss Florence down towards her. There were muffled groans and quick yelping cries, but the two ladies did not reappear, and I thought it seemly to depart, with my curiosity satisfied, and pleased in my possession of yet another secret. The knowledge that my mistress herself had bared her goddess's globes for chastisement, whether just or wilful, did not diminish her in my eyes. On the contrary, I knew that the next time her wrath obliged me to bare my own bottom to her birch, I should take her strokes in tender sympathy, and the knowledge that my squirming was the means of avenging her own. However, my deflowering by Dido led me to see things in a new light, as one does. A lady, specifically my mistress, was still a mysterious and magical creature wrapped in furs and silks, except that I now knew what delights lay under her adornments. Ladies sometimes complain that gentlemen, quote, undress them with their eyes. Given their beauty, it seems ungallant not to. I had half witnessed a scene of submission, and resolved to complete the satisfaction of my curiosity by the time-honored, if inglorious means of a keyhole. I knew I should be punished if caught, and thus reasoned to myself that I was playing fair. Besides, the prying eyes of my two ladies had discovered me in my immodest state, and I thought myself entitled to pry into their secrets in return. Accordingly, on the night I crept to the door of Miss Florence's room, concealing myself beside a suit of armor, which the Major had brought back as a trophy from the Middle East. The corridor was lit by the eerie gleam of the moon. I heard the rustling and pacing noises from Miss Florence's room, and at last there was a noise from the staircase. Dido appeared, wearing a crisp and dainty nurse's uniform, starched blue skirt and white blouse with lovely black stockings that gleamed in the moonlight, a coquettish white bonnet, and sharp high-heeled shoes. She carried two bulging cricket bags. She knocked softly on Miss Florence's door and entered without bidding. I heard them whisper, the door was locked, and in no time I hid my eye at the keyhole, of generous antique dimension. My member at once trembled and began to stiffen. Miss Florence was almost naked. She wore a corset of pale pink satin, with a frilly lace top that did not cover her breasts, but left them bare, and thrust them up like melons, with the buds of her wide cherry nipples deliciously stiff and tense amid their pimpled areolae. Oh my god. Her long colt's legs were sheathed in gleaming silk stockings pulled up very tight, almost to her fount, and of pure alabaster white. They were secured by pink garter straps to a pink suspender belt of frilly lace, which left a sweet downy strip of belly skin under her corset, with the big cleft of her navel visible like a lovely second gash. She wore pink shoes, too, with sharp points and heels of a height I had never imagined before, and which made her thighs and calves ripple and shiver deliciously as she balanced. Her fingernails were varnished green. Again. Varnished green. And her fount was naked to my gaze, not shaven bare like Dido's, but a lush hillock of golden curls, so ripe and thick that I longed to be a mouse scampering amidst her tresses. Beneath that, her fount lips glistened pink and swollen and wet. On her bed was strewn an array of clothing far removed from her sensible daytime attire, and probably very far removed from the actual period of time we're in. There were skimpy corselets, and nighties, and petticoats in livid hues, and a rainbow of stockings and panties, all shiny satin or silk. And there was the most delicious pair of pink silken panties I had ever seen, which she must have just decided to remove, to surprise her visitor with the submission of naked fount, for the crotch was damp and stained, and had evidently spent time selecting her garments, for she whispered, "Do I please you, Dido?" Dido answered that if Miss Florence pleased herself, that was well enough.
And then there's always the hillock.
The hillock.
Hillock, yes.
Being a mouse, nibbling upon... I don't even know.
And the fount.
Fuck.
More bounce for the fount, right?
Ah!
This fucking book.
Nothing says lovin' like a little rubbin' on the nubbin. Do I please you? But you must make yourself a frilly little lady for me, Flossie. Even when you don't know, I shan't join your devotion to Sapphism, and only act as a nurse to please you, and I hope to correct these juvenile tendencies of yours by sating them. Juvenile? If only I could lead you to despise the male as I do, murmured Miss Florence. She lowered her head and bit her lip, and I saw her eyes moisten. "Well," said Dido briskly, "you may remain coursed, Flossie, as I see it tight enough to be suitably painful, but you shall remove your shoes and stockings and suspender belt. I'm going to practice my splints and bandages on you tonight, before I play cricket with your naughty bare bottom." At these words Miss Florence's face brightened, and she hastened to obey. She fumbled with her garter straps and unhooked the suspender belt, and then rolled the silken stockings off each smooth, bare leg, till they were little piles at her ankles, and in a delicious fluid motion kicked off shoes and stockings at once. I wished her dainty bare feet would kick me thus as I lay bound before her, and make me catch both shoes and stockings in my mouth. I now saw that her toenails were painted the same green as her fingers. The revelation of her Sapphism came as a surprise. For anybody who doesn't know, Sapphism is being a lesbian. But made her infinitely more desirable in my eyes, because she was now truly unattainable, and her beating of me, a male, seemed infinitely precious because her contempt was sincere. She really did despise me. I could not fathom the absent Greville's role in this, except to wonder if he was a polite fiction to disguise her true sapphic nature. At any rate, my mistress now revealed herself to me as perfection itself, an object of unconquerable adoration.